Okay, so welcome everyone. Today it's May 5th, 2026. This is a SIG Network Gateway API community meeting, and this is a CNCF. This is actually a Kubernetes or community meeting, which means we should abide to the code of conduct. Basically, it means be nice with each other, don't be a jerk. And with that, let's just get started. So we have a pretty packed agenda. The link is on the chat. And I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we can discuss things. So let's do it. Okay. I think you can see my screen, right?
Amazing. Yep, we got it.
Okay, cool. So I have tried to add some time box on each item because we have a really packed agenda and really, not really controversial subject, which is backend. Probably in 30 minutes, everything's going to be solved. I don't think so, but let's get moving on. So first one, announcements. I'm going to be really quick on that one. I'm not sure. I can't see Flynn or Becca yet, so I'm going to skip for now the timeline reinforcements for 1.6. But one thing it's we need people to help reviewing things for 1.6. The bandwidth for gaps on 1.6 it's full. I'm gonna be the sole reviewer / approver for 3 weeks as Rob is on. Yeah, you want to see about that? You want to say about that?
So I'm out from this Friday Australia time is my last day until the 1st of June. So that means that you're going to have one approver for the experimental deadline. So one of the reasons I am dialing into a meeting at ungodly o'clock is because I wanted to try and make sure that we got consensus on a couple of things so that I am not blocking folks from getting their stuff in on time. But there is a deadline. Like we need to, if your stuff needs to be merged as experimental before the deadline, which is like towards midway through while I'm away. I think it's the 23rd of May, maybe. And so I don't want to be the cause of stuff there because like I didn't approve things, but so I want to make sure that everyone's across like the feedback I have about things. But then once I'm out, it's on Ricardo. So please look after Ricardo while I'm gone, and don't burn him out too hard. I would like him to be around when I come back. But I just want everyone to appreciate that like we are way down. We're at going to be running at a third capacity for the 3 weeks that I'm away in terms of approvers. So like if everyone could pitch in and sort of cross review each other's things, that would be really helpful. And remember that we are probably going to be 2/3 maintainers for the majority of this release, and we're already trying to do a lot. So it's likely that some stuff is going to get bumped, and more likely if you leave your stuff to the last minute. So get your stuff in early. Folks are doing that already, so kudos. But try and keep everything like tight because we just don't have as much bandwidth as normal.
Cool. Moving on. Remember, CFP for KubeCon US closes in less than 1 month. So if you want to submit something, just go ahead and submit something. This doesn't mean about the maintainer track, which we'll probably have some more time to deal and discuss about. And the last one is one Gateway API 1.6, actually main branch is already on Go 1.26 and Kubernetes 1.36. So eventually, if you are consuming from main and you see something breaking, please let us know, because there was a problem on controller runtime for, I guess, 2 or 3 days ago. I saw also John chiming in on that. I have chiming in on that, and they have released a new controller runtime, but it wasn't compatible with Kubernetes 1.36 libraries before this week. So just take a look, try to test with Go 1.26 and Kubernetes 1.36 already, if you can, on your main branch or your dev branch. Cool. I don't think any release manager join it yet. Did Flynn or Becca join it? No. Okay. Yeah, they told us that they were going to be late. Okay, next one, TCP route and UDP route. We have merged those two gaps as provisional yesterday. We are going to follow the same process of TLS route, which means Zach from AWS started writing them. I'm going to reach him and see if he's going to keep moving with those two gaps. The next steps are writing the API definition, conformance tests, and the whole process for making those experimental and then making them standard by 1.6, right? So just letting you know, I'm planning to present as soon as we have that as experimental to SIG Network as kind of part of the API review, because we don't expect the API of TCP route and UDP route to change. They are already there. They are already alpha. We just need to be sure that we are following the the expected process. But yeah, if someone is willing to take a look into that as well, just let me know. Chime in on the new gaps and the new PRs that are going to appear for TCP route and UDP route, and we will need also some help to write conformance tests for those as well. Writing and eventually testing if your implementation support that. Okay, and then I have run a lot, so we can discuss the main topic for this agenda. Right.
TCP routes and UDP routes are the last APIs that are in the non-experimental group, right? That are experimental.
Yes,
that's right. That's it. That are in.
Yes.
Yeah,
that'll
right.
be lovely to get them out of there.
That's a celebration.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, I expect. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ricardo.
No, I'm just gonna say that I was expecting you to bring some cakes and some beers to the next EGATS to celebrate.
I will, definitely. I mean,
so this meeting is being recorded, so we now have evidence that Lior is going to bring cake and beer to the next EGATS.
Yes.
Just so no pressure.
Oh man, Salt Lake City again.
Anyway, this meeting is recorded, so I should not comment on Salt Lake City. Did we talk at all about 1.6?
No,
we left the timeline reinforcement for you. So
okay, I don't think Becca is here yet.
No.
2 minutes sounds about good. Yeah, there's a timeline. We need to get stuff done. There are boards that are open that are actually pinned in the Slack channel. So those would be lovely to check out. Make sure that your favorite GEPs are in fact on the board being tracked. If they are not, you can add them. Lior, did you have something about that bit in particular?
It will be partially on 1.6 and partially on TCP UDP route. So go ahead and finish first.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to point out with respect to the next Gateway API release is, for anybody who missed it in Slack, I am gone for basically a month starting on June 8th, which means that at the moment, Becca is on the hook to manage the whole thing on his own, which is not okay. So we are looking for another release shadow. If we do not have someone step forward to be another release shadow, I will volunteer someone to be the release shadow. So I would highly encourage you to step forward if you have any interest in this, or if you would like to volunteer as tribute to save your fellow Gateway API members. Much more seriously on that front, it is not possible to do a release like Gateway API with just one person. It cannot happen. There are too many places where there are multiple balls moving, and there are too many places where somebody might need to, I don't know, go to a doctor's appointment or something. We really, really need more than one person. So, I see a note on here about the KubeCon CFP. Yes, the 31st of May, 23:59 Mountain Time, which is GMT -7 right now, I believe. So that's a good thing to do, especially if you would like to talk about Gateway API. Unless there are any questions about the next release coming up, and Lior and Nick both have hands, this is all that I have. So I am going to go over and I guess Lior and Nick can arm wrestle. Nick, was your comment entirely on timelines, or were you also back to TCP route?
No, I wanted to make a quick comment about the KubeCon CFP. Remember everybody that the maintainer track thing is later, but we do need to talk to SIG Network about maintainer tracks and make sure that we don't have to pull special things to get maintainer tracks again. So yeah, just a
Like,
to-do for everyone who might want to speak at the Gateway API maintainer track in Salt Lake City. We can do like a panel style, like a multiple presentation style again, and in fact I would suggest you do that. I won't be there, so I
I would
can't help
encourage
you,
that.
but yeah, if we do that, then we will need one non-man as part of the presentation. So, Katarzyna, if you want to, or Christine, Katarzyna, Candace, if you want a free ticket to KubeCon, like you can volunteer to
Yeah.
hit up the maintainer track thing. Just something to keep in mind.
Excellent.
Sorry.
And for the record, I will be at Salt Lake City, but I will not be doing the Gateway API maintainer track because I am not going to be able
You got
to.
more to do. Yeah.
I have
Okay,
previous
over to you,
commitments.
Leon.
Over to you. Yeah.
Quick question. On the intersection of TCP route and 1.6. So is the intent to graduate TCP route and
Yes.
UDP route in 1.6
Yes.
to
Yes,
standard?
Yes.
to standard. Yes.
That's amazing.
in-
Would it be, one second, would it be, when is the earliest we believe we'll see this?
One
The
dot-
release
is
you
scheduled
mean
for
the
June
next
30.
release?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
June 30th is the date.
June 30th. Okay.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, one second,
that
is this,
implies that we must have conformance tests and we must have documentation for both of those. Just to be very, very
Yeah.
clear.
So anyone who wants that to go ahead, we need conformance tests, documentation, and implementations to be like, yes, we support it, or at least a sponsor.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't support it
what
yet.
how many implementations supports it today?
I can think of at least a couple for TCP route. I don't know of anybody who does UDP route, but that mostly is because I have paid no attention to it.
Yep. Salim has a PR open to do
Sailor
UDP route as well.
Sailor says Nginx supports both. Excellent.
Yep.
Since those APIs, I have not talked with the maintainers about this. Since those APIs in particular are so bloody old without changes to the API, I would be open to discussing whether we could graduate them with fewer than the usual number of implementations.
Yeah, I'd probably be open to that too.
Yeah, me too.
As long as we got at least one that passes conformance tests, one or two.
And ideally, as long as we have, ideally more than one, not from the same outfit, that would make me feel a lot better. But these are really old APIs. They haven't changed. We can definitely have that discussion. Let's see. Oh yeah, I really should call out again, thanks to Eric for the work to get Gateway API up to Go 1.26 and working with Kubernetes 1.36. Sorry, Go 1.26, Kubernetes 1.36. Nice job to Eric. I don't know if he's here, but if so, great. Yeah. Oh, and thank you, Candace, for pasting in the important releases or important dates. So all of that, all of the important dates and such are pinned in the Slack channel as well, so they are readily accessible. And with that, I think we're over towards backend.
Okay.
Which I guess is Nick.
Yeah, I'll kick us off here because I think backend is kind of serving as a really great confluence of a lot of things that have been sort of kind of worrying me for a while. Not that I think backend is worrying, but like I think that it's a really good opportunity to address a bunch of stuff that we've kind of been kicking the can down the road for a while. But I think that in discussing it, I've been finding that there's like one of those impedance mismatches that we seem to have quite regularly, where it's clear that like when I talk about things, I'm thinking about them in a different way to what Keith is talking about them, for example. Not to pick on Keith, it's just like, different people think about things in different ways. And if you're using the same words, it's very easy to end up accidentally talking past each other because you don't realize that you're using the same words to mean different things. So what I'm trying to do today is to sort of clarify where I think we're at and like why we've ended up in some of this weirdness. It also sort of plays back to some of the things that we had happen with vacant tailless policy, and where I think we should be, the questions I think we need to answer to be able to move back and forward. Okay, preamble done. So, backend as the GEP is currently written is mainly about being a consumer resource that describes things that is like how you connect to things, how the gateway should connect to things.
In fact, it explicitly says it's a
Yes, it does.
consumer use case.
However, the more I have thought about this, the more I have thought that what we are really doing in adding backend is we are adding a gateway API wrapper or alternative to service. One of the biggest problems we've had in Gateway API for a long time is that we don't control the spec for service and we can't add anything into it. That is why backend TLS policy exists today, that we can't add anything into service. Keith, you want to go now?
Go ahead. I'm just queuing up. I'm just queuing up.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So the more I think about it, the more I think that having something that is if we've got one thing that kind of is effectively wrapping service, we should have a thing that we can use in multiple contexts. So the first question I asked myself was, does this really need to be only in a consumer context? And so the question that I want to ask everybody is backend really only useful in a consumer context? If so, I think Candace made the point that like, hey, is this name right? And I was like, well, yeah, but that's because I was also thinking of it in a producer context. So if we're having a thing that's only useful in a consumer context that describes how you connect to a backend, and we need, like, my argument is we need something that is useful in a producer context that describes properties of backends. If it's not the same thing, then the consumer one probably shouldn't just be called backend. It should have a more descriptive name than just backend. That's sort of question one. I'm going to proceed to give my opinion about that question in a minute. So, give me a sec to finish my sort of preamble and thing, and then I'll hand over to Keith. So, as I said, Keith sort of put a link in the thing to the comment that I spent a while typing out today. So I'm going to take liberally from what I'm saying there. I think that one of the things that has confused us for a long time is that in the original Ingress case, Ana, the application developer, is intended to own a set of pods, a service that exposes those pods, and then a HTTP route that like exposes that service via a gateway. So like it's kind of Ana owns the service and the HTTP route that exposes that service. Right? That's the sort of the intended, like that's what we had in mind when we were talking about Ana originally. Right? So have we extended that a bit?
Clear,
absolutely. Yeah.
To be clear, that is what I intended when I originally came up with Ana. So yes. We can definitively say that was the original intent with Ana.
Yes. Okay. So, but I think that one of the things that's happened is, in many cases, people are wanting to use HTTP route where they don't control the service that the HTTP route points to, right? So, in that comment, I've sort of called that person Greta for like a agentic person, or maybe Gamma to make Keith's point as well. Like if you are using a HTTP route to control traffic to a service that you do not own, then that's a very subtly different use of the HTTP route than the original sort of Ana persona. And the subtle difference there is like in that you're configuring connection properties for the gateway rather than like describing what the backend will accept. And that's so that's where a lot of the confusion from backend TLS policy came. Is I was thinking of it as describing what the backend will accept, and a lot of other people were thinking of describing the config that the gateway needed to do. So that's the example of the impedance mismatch that I'm talking about. Now, in terms of other things, I think we might want to put into a producer backend resource. Is, session persistence is a good example of a thing where the owner of the application needs to be able to say, for session persistence to work, you must do this, right? Like, and obviously backend TLS policy is another good example of there's an extent to which the owner of the application needs to be able to say, for TLS to work, you have to use this CA and you have to do this, or it's just not going to work. There is absolutely a place for client-side config for TLS, but less so for session persistence, right? Like you have to configure the gateway to correctly manage the set, like to know what to look at and what to hash for the session persistence. But it's the owner of the service who needs to tell you what you need to hash for the session persistence, if you see what I'm saying. So that is like session persistence is a producer thing, not a consumer thing. So I think I should let Keith talk for a second here. But like I have a couple of things that I would propose here. But what I'm trying to get people to agree on is like there is a slight difference. It is a subtle, nuanced difference in those usages. So Keith.
Yeah, I just put one. So I have a couple of realizations that Nick's excellent comment helped me sort of come up with, and hopefully maybe it'll help the discussion here as well. So I like I said, I put this in the chat. I think that the presence of HTTP route in general implies ownership of the backend in every case except for the egress case. So even in the Gamma world, when you've got HTTP route, the service that you're sending to is typically a service that you are owning.
So that is not the case because we explicitly have a feature that's like HTTP route as a consumer.
That's right. I forgot about that. But yeah, never mind. Yeah. Okay, so throw that.
Keith, the flip side of that one is that, like I said, implies might just be a slightly too strong word. Yeah. If you look at an HTTP route that points to a given service and that service is in the cluster, I think it's reasonable that most of us would start by assuming that Anna owns both of those things.
Well, there's also, in the Gamma case, there's also the parent ref, backend ref split. So
that's the thing I've been thinking a lot about as we look at these questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wasn't fresh on that. So okay. So ignore that. The big thing that I think Nick's comment helped me realize is that I think ingress, as I'm looking at the span of use cases right now. So Gateway API started off like optimizing for the ingress use case. As we've done Gamma, now we're doing agentic. It seems more and more like ingress semantics might be the exception in a lot of cases, because you've got with the ingress case, you've got a proxy like as the gateway where traffic is coming through, and there's this trust where the producer is writing configuration to help the gateway talk to it, and that feels, to me at least, somewhat unique. And so when it comes to the backend gap, I've described it as consumer only, and sort of coupling the consumer like role in traffic with the backend role of service. And maybe that is too strong a link. So backend role of service being the bag of endpoints, front-end role of service being basically the cluster bit. Typically, part of how I got here is like trying to think, okay, consumer only because this is backend, but that might be too strong. The main thing I want to make sure that we avoid with backend is that we don't let front-end use cases seep in. Like if it's producer stuff, I think I could be convinced on that. But I don't want any front-end role stuff and making its way into backend.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. But
yeah, that was basically what I was going to say, is that we have landed in an enormous amount of trouble because service so thoroughly conflates the front end and the back end.
Yes.
And we need to avoid that.
I think Solani,
Nick, I think what you're saying about the difference between the route owner and the workload owner make a lot of sense, which makes me sad because it's going to complicate our lives. But yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's the right thing to do.
Can someone
I'm sorry,
can someone
go
just
ahead.
provide, but what is the real difference between a producer though? I think Keith, you mentioned producer and not a front and not a back. What did you say?
So there are, in the early days of Gateway API, we sort of had this. We still have this glossary of terms.
Producer consumer.
Yeah, producer consumer as far as the roles in the traffic path. The producer or consumer of a particular service or a particular piece of traffic versus the front end, back end roles of service. And it's fairly, in my mind, I sort of coupled and bound the front end role of service with the producer role of the traffic path, and the consumer role of service with the back end role of the traffic path, or the load balancing role of the traffic path. And I think Nick's point is a good one in that those aren't necessarily coupled, because the back-end role of service is useful for things outside of just the consumer role of the traffic path.
Yeah. So that's what I'm
consumer
talking about.
persona.
Yeah, and I think it's good to talk about this in some examples, right? So as I said, so for session persistence, the owner of the service owns the session persistence config, right? Like they need to be able to define this is how my service expects session persistence to work, because session persistence requires application level coding to make it work, right? So yes, Leo.
But does it mean that the consumer have to or must respect that? That's the
Well, they don't have to, but if they choose not
they
to,
don't,
then the
bad
session
things happen.
persistence won't work, right? Like,
correct.
yeah, so like they don't have to, but the point that, and that's actually one of the points that I'm working towards. So give me a sec.
Actually,
and then
Nick, I'm going to jump in with a time check for a minute.
Yep.
We have another
that's-
half hour of stuff on the agenda.
Yeah, so
So
that's why we did allow half hour for this discussion, because I expected that it's going to take a little bit. So but this one is probably, so one of the reasons I am dialing into this meeting, I think you missed this before, Finn, is I'm going to be away. I want to make sure that we get to some consensus on this, particularly before I go, because this one has impacts on the egress gateway one, and then
and everything
this
else.
needs to be dealt with before I go. So
I'm
yeah,
sorry, when exactly are you out again?
Friday
Till when?
till the 1st of June.
Thank you.
So I will be out for the experimental deadline, which is the key thing for this one.
Right.
So yeah, so I think there's two sets of settings, right? Like there's two places where you might want to where you can configure things, right? Like there's the server side stuff that belongs to the person who owns the service, and there's the client side stuff that belongs to the thing that wants to connect to that service, right?
Yeah.
So session persistence, that information belongs to the service owner. What was the one you circuit breaking, rate limiting, those belong to the person who wants to connect to that service, right? Like the service owner doesn't get to say, you have to do this retries, or you have to have these circuit breaking settings or something like that. That belongs to the person who is connecting to the service, the consumer, right? Like there is some stuff where there are settings that should sit on both cases, on both sides.
Like
TLS is that example, right? Like the server needs to be able to say, hey, here's the stuff that you need to do to connect to me. And the client needs to be able to say, well, I'm only going to allow people to do this sort of connection. There's negotiation there. One of the things that I think would be a really great example there is minimum and maximum TLS versions. That is a negotiation when you actually make the TLS connection, right? But it would be really useful to be able to determine purely from config if that is even going to work. So it'd be really nice for service owners to be able to say, hey, I have a busted ass old app that only does TLS 1.1. If your gateway has a policy that you must do TLS 1.3, then there's never going to be a TLS flow, and it'd be really useful to like be able to surface that as a config error rather than a, hey, why aren't my connections working, right? So and so one of the things, okay, so that's the sort of a large part of the preamble of what I've been thinking about here. One of the other things that I think is really useful is to think about and so we were talking before, like, hey, are we going to have this one resource that can do, that can do both consumer side settings and producer side settings? The thing I think that's really useful to think about that is what happens when you have a HTTP route that wants to connect to a service that has session persistence settings that come from the service owner, but you want to have a retry policy, or you want to have a circuit breaker, or you want to have or you want to do some other client side setting. You can't have. Do we have a back end that points to a back end, right? Like, what is the way that we handle that, right? Like that seems gross.
That's what Solo is doing, at least.
Well, I mean, I want to talk about the
still
API.
Seems gross.
Yeah, like, I mean, I want to talk about the API here and what's the best way to serve this use case. To me, like, it seems like having, like, defining the back end as this describes endpoints that you connect to, and optionally stuff about those endpoints that the service owner wants you to know, right? Like, so, in the case of, so that covers the external name case, which is the first reason that we're doing this, because that's about how you connect to the back end, right? Like, and an important thing to know about that is, yes, you're using a DNS name and there are security concerns and all the other stuff that Keith and I have talked about ad nauseum, but it also lets, the fact that it's like stuff the service owner wants you to know, lets you know about session persistence, right? I think that we should have a separate thing that holds the client settings, right? Like, so that would be, I mean, we already have retries in HTTP route, but like, it would be nice to have one place where we put, retries, timeouts, but also stuff like circuit breaking settings, rate limiting settings, client side TLS properties as opposed to the server side TLS properties and stuff like that. Does that need to be the backend resource? Probably not. But I think that if we're not going to have it be that, then we need to be very clear about what the context of the backend resource is and what stuff belongs in there. Keith.
Yeah, so this is making me think about the overrides aspect of backend. So in the GEP, if you've got like the backend that is in your namespace is the thing that takes effect for all enforcement points, all proxies in your namespace. And so this means that in a multi-tenancy model, if whatever's backend that namespace becomes authoritative for traffic originating from that namespace. I'm trying to think about what the implications of what you're saying as far as separate thing for consumer only settings versus thing for backend. Like, so I guess I'm
Keith,
fundamentally
when you and I
worried.
talked about
I think,
this,
yeah, I think one of the things that I'm not clear on there is, to me, the backend object is designed to be the thing that you put in the backend ref inside the HTTP route that says, for traffic that matches all of the rules that are in this stanza, send it to this backend, right? Like, so the only traffic capture method that is relevant for the backend is it referenced in a HTTP route? That's one of the things that I like.
That's where I disagree a little bit, because I think the other benefit of backend is, sort of in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, how can a mesh be able to target a backend for things like in the egress case, for example?
Okay, so no, I think in that case, currently the idea is that you would use a HTTP route like that has a front end that has a parent ref of a front end, maybe probably a service that uses the back end as a backend ref, right? So I don't think backend ref should not include any traffic capture options. Traffic capture should be handled by something that you attach a HTTP route to, right? That should be an invariant.
I tend to agree with that.
Is that HTTP, like nothing below HTTP route in the hierarchy captures traffic. Capturing traffic is a thing for the thing that the HTTP route belongs to. Gateway, service, some other thing we make. Capturing traffic is not a prerogative of the backend itself. You use the backend to decide to describe where the traffic is going to, right? Like, and so I think because otherwise we risk building too much behavior into the backend.
In particular, if we allow a backend to be a traffic capture mechanism, I don't see a way around having it conflate the front end and the backend.
Yes. So the traffic capture is a front end concern.
Yeah.
I agree with
agreed. Yes. Sorry, I'll pat my hand up for a bit. I misspoke a little bit, but I'll let Lior go.
I'm saying I agree with what you said, Nick. The only thing that I'm not sure if this is where Keith, maybe this is where it's coming from. The only thing is, like, if we reason about it, then the gateway specifics, like, this makes sense. But like, if we need to kind of be very clear about, because if we are saying you're gonna have to specify HTTP route pointing to a backend, then it means that right now in the egress case, you're gonna have to map all of the things you're actually going out to if you want to define.
So the only way that egress gateways work, right, is if you have like egress gateways are going to do nothing. So sorry. So we're talking about egress gateway a little bit now because it's relevant. Yeah. Egress gateways, the traffic capture there is no traffic capture, right? Like you specifically define your clients as in order to exit the cluster, you must talk to this IP address, right? Like. Right. So that's how egress gateways are defined to work at the moment, because traffic capture is actually a really hard problem to solve. So like right now it is defined as you configure your clients that they must use this as like a proxy. And so traffic capture is you go to a egress gateway. That gateway has an IP address that's going to be a cluster IP, and and then there are routes attached to that have backends in the thing. So yeah, like I understand, Keith. I think it's actually really important to be very clear about this. I'm not mad. Like I think that it's this is just one of those things where it's really important to be super clear about this.
We just always assume you're mad, Nick. It's
Passion is not mad.
I agree. Traffic capture not in scope. I'm making a PowerPoint on this. I'm presenting at SIG Network meeting on Thursday, where I'm going to try to sort of talk about what Flynn and Mike and myself have talked about a little bit as far as where we're hoping to try to build with a lot of this stuff. But I think my concern with sort of Nick, the director you're talking about, is that I don't want an HTTP route to be required. I think like in a lot of cases,
probably disagree on that one, Keith.
Yeah, strong disagree there. 100% strong disagree. HTTP route should always be required because that's how we're defining.
Let's say route instead of HTTP route.
Yeah, so like, sure, like some sort of route.
I mean, in the typical east-west pattern, a route is pure overhead for a user. It is pure overhead.
See,
if you've got a front end going to a back end, like,
well, hang on a second.
Think about service today. No, go ahead.
So I'm going to pick on Linkerd because obviously it's the east-west one that I know the best, right? If you take a Linkerd and you install it and you mesh some workloads and you do nothing else, Linkerd will do its thing, and you get observability and you get security and everything is good. You get some very basic reliability, but mostly around like gRPC load balancing and crap like that, because you're relying only on Kubernetes constructs that talk about how traffic flows and everybody understands those. The moment you want to do anything fancier than that, you have to create an HTTP route so that you can describe to Linkerd what fancy stuff you want to do, because we cannot infer, and nobody can infer from a service that you want to do retries, for example, right?
Sure, but retries, that's just because retries happen to live on the route.
It's because retries are a thing that you cannot do without describing the characteristics of the traffic, because you can't retry everything. You are only allowed to retry things that a human operator has told you are okay to retry. So
so
the route is the vehicle by which the route is the vehicle for attaching the description that you want to do with what you want to use for things. Yep. And that's been baked into Gateway API for a very long time.
Yes, from the beginning for like north-south cases. And then as we started building Gamma, that is the assumption that, right, like if you are, you can have a fallback thing like Flynn describes for Linkerd, where if both of your namespaces are enrolled or whatever, and you're doing things, then you'll get the Linkerd stuff, you'll get some benefit. But like to access the full power, you have to define like a front end, a service front end, attach a HTTP route to it, and have the config live in the thing. It is not safe to do it other than that because it's too magic. Like it's too implicit. The other corollary that's very important there is once you add one HTTP route, you also must implicitly deny everything that doesn't match that, or else it doesn't work.
The other thing that, your other option, Keith, is you can go and throw an Istio virtual service in there so you can describe things beyond service, right? I don't know that I'd say that's better.
I mean, I think that's where I'm coming from, right? Like in my Istio world, I can attach a policy saying, here's like the retries I want to do, or here's the circuit breaking behavior I want based on things that are talking to that service will understand that applies there. And that's the model I had envisioned. When we started Gamma, back in ref, if I recall correctly, was optional. We went back and made it non-optional, or maybe it still is for Gamma, but required for. I have to double check.
It's required.
Yeah.
Okay, but it started off being optional because we knew that, like, okay, to get anything, you've got to go make a blank HTTP route that does functionally nothing. And if we're talking about something like we're building towards actually replacing service, that in my mind cannot be the default behavior. You've got now before you have service, now you need an extra thing.
The thing is, having the extra thing is the thing that stops you from building the not like organic nightmare that is service, right? Like the problem with service is it does too much. It's trying to be too many things to do too many different people. The reason to make sure that we have separate things for separate concerns, even though in the simplest cases it's just overhead, like it means that the complex cases are described using the same mechanisms as the simple cases, right? Like And that's the thing that you need to move towards, is that the complex cases need to be described with the same language as the simple cases. You shouldn't have to be that it's like, oh, you just use a backend until you get to this level of complexity, and then you have to learn a whole lot of things. Like, it's better to have people be like, to make this work, you have a thing, and then you have a very simple HTTP route that, yes, is just overhead, but like, unfortunately, the downside is, yes, you have to have an overhead HTTP route, but the upside is that you are explicit about what you're doing. And explicit beats implicit for supportability in the long term every time. Okay, so I think that's probably the most important thing. There's probably one of the most important things we need to be clear on, is that it's the designer backend needs to be, like, to me, like, I think Ricardo and I are in agreement on this. So, like, we kind of get veto here, that it is like, it is a requirement that the backend ref is only going to be used, the backend object is only going to be used in a backend ref in a route, right? Like, so it's not, it can't do traffic capture. You can't use it outside of a route in the Gateway API context. You can take the Gateway API backend object and build a bunch of implementation specific behavior based on it. That's cool, but that's not what the upstream is going to have.
Mike made a point here about a front-end resource that has a back-end ref to a back-end being a basic meshy case. I might be okay with that if we have defined a thing that deliberately is meant for that, but I would also probably be more fine with having a really trivial, simple way to define a backend, an HTTP route, so that you don't have to do things like list a bunch of boilerplate that you don't really need in a route, right? See default gateways, for example.
So Flynn,
Check.
the issue with if you truly split out backend to not have any of kind of the front end properties, and you have an HTTP route targeting it as a backend ref, you need some attachment point then for that HTTP. The HTTP route does not have a name. It needs to have a parent ref to something. So
long game.
Yeah,
we have to solve that problem.
Yes, so that's where
in the
could be a
near
parent
term,
end. For north-south, the parent ref to the gateway is sufficient.
Yeah. In the near term, we have a front-end resource. Its name is service.
Yep.
It's a shitty front-end resource, but we have it, and we can still take advantage of it.
Yes.
In the somewhat longer term, oh my God, yes, absolutely. We should be figuring out how we want this to work and doing something better.
I think that we should not, like, we are not going to be able to move forward with the backend resource if we don't keep it very tightly scoped to just describing backends, right? Like, because
I agree.
It needs to be useful in both the north-south case and the east-west case and any other mesh cases and any other cases we can come up with. And the way to do that is to say, this thing is for describing how you connect to backends, and optionally some properties that those backends can specify that are relevant, like for establishing a successful connection to those backends. If we can agree on that, then I think we have a place to move forward with the current thing. I think, Keith, part of that is you're gonna need to, like, remove the references to consumer stuff and things like that, and we need to be more specific about that. But that was the thing that I wanted to get consensus on today. Are we in agreement on that? If so, then I think we can probably let this go, and then Keith, you and I can sync async before I go and try and catch some of that stuff, and try and, like, capture some of this stuff, so that then, like, I can sort of go away on a holiday and be like, you guys have got this. We're all in agreement. I'm happy with where we're going to end up, right, with backend.
I'm on board with that scope for backend.
Yep, great. Okay, so Lior. Ricardo.
Yeah, I mean, you guys concluded it. I'm not gonna add more to the more to define. I just want to make I just want to make a comment about the HTTP route requirement. It feels like the scope that you just described is not going to explicitly rule out, hey, you have to do it only with HTTP route, but I feel like it's something you're going to take with Keith offline and kind of update back.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna add a time check here. I think we got the 30 minutes. So Nick, you and Keith, you are on agreement that you are gonna at least have some conclusion before you leave on holidays, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
So Keith, my Friday morning or Thursday afternoon, like I should be able to do some like an actual call then. Let's do async until then, and then we'll do a call before I go to, like, get in sync. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Nick.
And
If you-
Keith,
if-
Keith and
if you
Nick,
can
I'd be
just-
happy to be in on that if you think it'll help too.
Yes.
I'll create a room. I'll create a room or a thread or something. I'll make sure people can chime in.
I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Okay. Thanks. So Nick, the next one.
Yeah,
it's
so
not
we
that
talked about
controversial
Egress
as
Gateway
this
a little
one.
bit.
Just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about Egress Gateway a little bit. So for me, in terms of I would like the idea of egress gateways to move to experimental in this release. That is a good goal for us to aim for. I want to be upfront that I am not comfortable with that happening unless we have a way to determine like what purposes a gateway serves from the gateway object without having to look at other stuff. Morgan has added to that proposal the idea of having a type field, which is a list that can specify ingress and or egress. That allows for implementations to be able to say, I only support types of ingress. If you put egress in there, sorry champ, I'm out. It allows for us to have gateways that are mixed ingress and egress, which is a thing that people will probably want to do. Like people have definitely asked for me for that before, and it allows for gateways that are only egress. Now, the nice part about it being a list is that like your implementation can be like, I don't do both. Screw you, I'm out, right? Like and reject the gateway immediately. The other thing that I think is not optional is there must be a in-spec way for a cluster for an egress gateway to be able to in a standard way request a cluster IP. Now, my suggestion for that is that we add a specific, tightly scoped type IP address thing that is called cluster IP and handles that exact thing only, with the aim that we will follow up with a proper iteration on the routability gap later, where that cluster IP thing may end up being syntactic sugar for some routability settings. But we need a way out of the egress gateway hole where currently the egress gateway behavior relies on there being a cluster IP and no one has a standard way to do that. And that sucks. So like those are my sort of two requirements is we need a solution for cluster IP and there must be something. If it's not the type field, then it needs to be something like that. That's what I want to see. So Leo, then John, over to you.
Yeah, I think I don't understand why we want this type because again, as you said, like, and I think that's one of the feedback we discussed earlier is like someone can just have a gateway and it can be a mixed use, or someone can just come up and say, okay, we don't standardize it. Like one implementation can come up with another gateway class and say, oh, the gateways from this gateway class serves X. So I'm not sure like what's the type actually gives us, given that I don't think we're doing any more validation on the type about like, okay, if it's egress, you only allow this field, or if it's ingress, you only allow that field.
So the idea is that like one of the biggest validations we will have is if your gateway does not have egress in the type, then you cannot use a backend with an external name field. Right? Like that stops people.
Whoa.
No, if you do not have egress. So you can't have an ingress only gateway that has an external name field. That lets you bypass a bunch of the security concerns I have about ingress gateways with external names. Right? Like you can have, as long as egress is in the type or capabilities of the gateway, then sure, have external name. You are opting into doing that behavior. Right? The other reason that I have is a combined ingress-egress gateway is effectively an open squid proxy on the internet. That is a really great way to participate in DDoS attacks and a bunch of other really bad crap that people need to know they are opting into. Right? Like,
for the younger crowd, an open squid proxy on the internet was a very, very bad thing.
Yes, like a very bad thing. And so making it so that people can accidentally do that is very bad, capital V, capital B, right? Like people need to be able to opt into that and people need to be able to configure their implementations to say, I do not under any circumstances want to allow that. Right? Like that's one of the biggest reasons for the type field.
The biggest concern I have with this is that we've been using, and others, a Gateway API in production for, I don't know, 3 years or whatever. And we have hundreds of users using egress today. So I don't see how we can make a change.
So I'm sorry, man. Like we never specified.
It's a V1 API, Nick. You can say,
we never specified that behavior, dude. Like you built an implementation specific thing. I'm sorry you got production customers relying on it. That sucks. But like we need to be able to specify this stuff at the API level, right? Like the thing that I'm going to say that I want to see here is the default for the field being unset is ingress only.
But
Right, like-
but Nick, one second. But Nick, I think as far as I understand, I'm trying to grasp all the arguments for why this type. As far as I understood from you now, it's this about like you don't want people to accidentally have an ingress gateway that points to an external because of the security issue.
Mhm.
Like, is there anything else? Because obviously there's other validations you could do.
Discoverability as well. Like, how do you know, looking at a gateway, how do you know that it's an egress or an ingress gateway?
I mean, it depends if your implementation want, like, for example, if I
as someone who is looking at gateways in my cluster, if I do kubectl get gateways, how do I know which ones are for egress and which ones are for ingress?
Yeah, but who's like again, like if your implementation supports it with a different gateway class, you may do it this way. If your implementation is telling you, I don't care if it's an ingress or egress, you just use the gateway, whatever routes you're configuring there, we're gonna honor it, which it looks like we have a representation of implementations that are doing it. So like, I understand that you're coming from a perspective, I want to do it, but you may have customers for other implementations who like are not, doesn't care about it, right? So
I understand,
we
but
can reason about security. Like what I'm trying to say, like we can reason and kind of brainstorm other options for security, but just shoving in some type there, I don't think this is
So like, I guess my concern here is it that you have an objection to the type, or that it's going to break people who are already using it in this way that we never anticipated?
No, it's just that I feel like, sorry, someone talked.
John?
No,
maybe?
you can finish, then I'll go.
I'm saying like it's not necessarily just because we have some people, right? Like obviously, I mean, up until John just spoke, I didn't even know, but it's just like I don't see the value of adding a type. I understand that you're saying you want the value for being explicit. I want to talk about more options to this, because adding a type there is not necessarily something that I or someone else want to promote as like, from now on, we differentiate between ingress and egress gateways, and this is 100% something you have to do.
So
if I can jump in as well, like I
you go,
I
John.
agree with you actually that I fundamentally don't think that having a type is the right model. I was using the fact that I believe this is a breaking change to a V1 API because I thought it was a slam dunk argument, but it was shot down immediately. But it's not my only concern. It's not even my primary concern. I do also feel that this is not the way that this should be exposed.
So that's cool, but like I'm more than happy for other people to come up with another way to represent this. But to me, it is imperative that people looking at the gateway be able to tell like what the purpose of the gateway is, because there are subtle differences in behavior that come when the gateway is used for ingress and egress, right? Like there are subtle differences that some things are okay in ingress, some things are okay in egress, some things like that's what I'm trying to say is there
Do
are
we have
subtle
that list though?
differences.
No, I think I disagree with that assumption.
And is it about ingress and egress, Nick, or is it about whether it's exposed externally or not? Right.
Yes, that's what I think that you're conflating right now, and I don't think we should conflate it.
No, it's like if you are doing an ingress that happens to be to an internal network, like the security security between inside the cluster and outside the cluster, regardless of whether it's in your WAN or on the public internet, is still like those are different security contexts, right? Like it's still relevant information. Like I understand what you guys are saying, like, but we've been using it and it hasn't been a problem. I get it. But like I have to think about everybody who's using this API, not just you guys, right? Like not just the people who are doing this. The people who like we have to think about the people who are using it publicly. If we don't have a type field, the people who are using it publicly can get proper screwed, right? Like right? If we don't have a very clear way to indicate that this gateway must only be used for ingress, must only be used for egress, or I don't care, do whatever you want, right? Like
Nick,
those
I don't
things.
think anyone has objections to saying that the gateway is publicly accessible or not. Like at least I don't. Like that's perfectly fine. But the egress use case distinction is not good, I think. Let me give you an example.
Please.
We have a lot of people that have a service that's running both locally and on-prem, right? The on-prem is like an egress failover. Why should a user have to declare like this gateway is ingress and egress? Where it's going is entirely irrelevant. What does matter is who can access it, right? Whether that's based on cluster IP or load balancer or even like authorization rules or whatever fancy things you want to put. But where it's going doesn't really have any merit.
So
I disagree. I think that in that case you have two different intents. One, you are creating a forward proxy, and the other one you are creating like a reverse proxy, right? So
How is it a forward proxy? I'm confused. Can you go into more detail on that?
No, I'm sorry.
The squid example is entirely wrong because we're not doing
But-
like a forward proxy, right? We're building a reverse proxy API. If we have a forward
No,
proxy,
you are.
that's a different story.
If you are creating that for egress, you are creating that for a forward proxy, right? Isn't that the intent?
Egress
That
is a
It's not
you
egress.
actually-
That's the distinction. It's just because it's going outside the cluster does not
So-
mean fundamentally that it's egress.
So, but it does, because the only unit we have is clusters, right? Like I understand what you were saying. For the use case, it's not really egress because you're
Hey,
like,
folks, we're
Yeah.
at time.
I understand.
I think
This one
that
isn't-
I think that this is an excellent conversation, and I think that the conversation is basically driving home that we do not have the consensus that we need right now to take egress gateways into experimental.
So that will
I
mean that
think-
egress gateways will wait for the next version. So to
That
be
is
clear.
what I would say. If we have to decide it right now, I would also be okay with getting folks together to continue this conversation later. But gut feel, we ain't got consensus. It shouldn't go experimental.
I am fine
Anybody-
with that. But as I
Me
said,
too.
that was why my requirements were like, for it to go experimental, I want to see this. So if we don't
Yeah,
agree,
and I think that's fair.
that the things that that I said are good, then that's fine. But that just means it shouldn't go experimental.
Now, there are 5 other things on the agenda, and we are at time. Is there anything that anybody feels absolutely must go forward right this second? Laura, I
wanna-
know you were saying
Yeah.
you wanted to talk about extensibility. I have a
Yeah,
few
I
more
was
minutes. None of us are going to be offended by people bailing at this point.
I will be offended.
At least
but
I won't.
it's
At least
fine.
I won't be. So,
I was chatting with Ricardo about like the reason I'm saying is like I wanted to have you and Nick before you leave. I was chatting with Ricardo and like it's kind of a continuous to a lot of forums of chat about extensibility, right? Like service extensions to whatever we call it, right? We've been talking about it for years. And there was initially, as far as I remembered, some things kicking off in the WGI Gateway group. In the last few and also the agreement was that like, okay, let's just do a prototype, let's use XProc and stuff like that. I think one of the last 2 meetings that I felt like there was a little move towards something that is more in process, and like the extensibility part for like defining the protocol and stuff like that was a little bit more, I don't know if they prioritize it the right word, and maybe I even like miscapturing it. But the point is, unrelated to this, we have been discussing it for a while, and one of the things that I think we have came to the conclusion many times in the past is like someone need to go define the protocol, and then once the protocol is defined, either in Gateway API or there was the other option that someone brought up, which is XDS repo, then we could actually build something on top of the protocol. And I think one of the good example was that Flynn's X.Z attempt to definition. Not sure if it got merged or not, but it kind of helps us a lot in a way to, for example, drive Nick's gap with what we have right now in Gateway API. The other thing I would say is like the payload process, like the WGI Gateway has a kind of a PR to say, trying to define a protocol, which is more or less very, very new. And I think it's very aspirational. And I think we need to recognize as a group that like Envoy's like XProc is by far the most thing that is useful. And I know a lot of people has a lot of problems with it. But I would rather start with this, not like merge it, but like someone come a PR, do XProc and tell what we want to fix, as opposed to, hey, let's just do an aspirationally new API and actually expect that people will actually implement that. Because if we get an API and people are not implementing this is not what's really going to work.
Keith clearly had a response to that. Keith, you want to jump back in for a second?
Keith, like before you jump in, did you respond like when I said start with XProc, meaning like it's actually going to be merged? Because this was not my intention. My intention was kind of more similar to also something that John said before, and I think we all said before, is like, let's not just try come up with a whole new API the way we believe we're going to drive it, because the likelihood that it's actually going to be is very small.
So,
I feel like we're conflating two separate parts of this discussion, actually. But go ahead, Keith.
so
Oh,
that
Keith, that's a fascinating look for you.
sorry, two different cameras. So like that approach is what I have a problem with. So like I was slightly concerned about it in AI Gateway, but I understand for prototyping an API, it sure in that group it makes sense to start with XProc. If we're talking about wait, did I say gate? Okay, we're in group AI Gateway. I understand starting with XProc for a prototype. I think that makes sense. It's just there. If we're talking about gateway API and standardizing external processing, then I do not want to start with XProc just because it exists and just because Envoy does it. I don't like. I'm very much against starting because I think that you're just going to have this sunk cost fallacy, and you're not going to be able to design an API that's best to solve the problems you're trying to solve. I think there's a lot we can actually solve without external processing for what it's worth. But even if you just start with external processing space as a goal, we should just figure out what problems are we solving and build API from that, and Envoy can choose to implement it or not. We shouldn't be beholden to a single proxy or data plane implementation, in my opinion.
I think,
and in fact, even
I
in Working Group AI Gateway, we've started down this road of, excuse me, of trying to figure out what does payload processing look like if it's not external necessarily, right? So
yeah, but this is a completely different problem to solve.
But I'm still with Keith on this one. I do not want to start a gateway API standardization effort with XProc. Full stop.
So I think so I think to me the thing that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Leo, but the thing I don't think that Leo was trying to say we should just take XProc and make that a standard and then change it from there. He's saying take XProc as the basis for a standard, because it does a lot of things that's kind of close to what we do already. Fix the problems with XProc and make that a standard, right? Like,
I'm still against that. That's the thing. I understood that, and I'm still against that approach.
Okay, Nick, so like,
the
thing is that in Working Group AI Gateway, we are actually seriously questioning how close XProc is to a thing we want to do.
Right.
To the thing we want.
I'm fine. At the end of the day. So can I just let me finish, Leo? I think at the end of the day, I think the thing we need to end up with is a protocol specified somewhere that's not like Envoy specific, that everybody is going to be happy to use, right? Like, but then the problem you have is everybody's got to implement it, right? So like, if you make a shiny new protocol that's awesome for everybody to use, and all the implementers are like, go screw yourself, we're not implementing that, then you may as well have not made it a protocol. Right, like you got to come to the party at least a little bit with the implementers, talk to them a bit, and be like, how hard is this going to be, and like, how significant a departure is this from what you're doing already? Because if it's really hard, people are just going to be like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't need to do that. I've got a thing already.
So and Flynn, 1 second, I'm queuing a little bit. And one of the things, we both in the Working Group AI Gateway meetings, one of the things that came up there is also from John. John had to drop. He said he has concerns with vendor neutrality, but one of the things we kept saying there is like, it's okay to try and fix some of the stuff, but like, or all the stuff, but like, if we're trying to start very aspirational, hey, we're gonna define how extensive like service extensions are going to work. This is something that's going to be very hard to get buy-ins from any data plane.
And I'm not sure. I do not remember who was present at the last AI Gateway Working Group meeting, but there was a big discussion. Yeah, there was a really big discussion last time around to the tune of XProc by definition is talking about external processing. It is talking about offloading processing to a thing that is not the gateway. The discussion in the last meeting was maybe that shouldn't be the first resort. Maybe there's a bunch of stuff we can do that does not require external processing at all.
Sorry to cut you off. I agree with you, and this is how I started the discussion here. And I said that the Working Group AI
Gateway, if you're not talking about external processing, then starting with XProc is fundamentally a questionable decision.
But 1 second. What I'm trying to say, Flynn, is like, and I said it in the beginning, is that the working group has moved to focus on things that maybe can be done in process, or maybe we don't need to offload to external processing. This makes sense, but it's a different problem to solve, right? I'm talking about external processing, call it however you want, but things that calling outside the proxy which we have been
So-
discussing forever. The fact that the group is trying to focus right now on something that is in process or something that could be solved, this makes sense to me. I'm just saying that for the extensibility part, it still makes sense to me to not try and define a whole new protocol from start, because I think it would not, the likelihood for actually trying to conclude on something is going to be very low, as opposed to open a PR, have people actually saying what's their problem with, iterating, improving this PR, and get a defined protocol in tree.
Nick's had his hand up for a bit. You want to jump in?
So the one thing I did want to say was, I want to guarantee to all of you who are like, let's make a new protocol, your spin up time for making a new protocol is
That's
12 months at the very shortest, if you are very lucky and you have very good consensus amongst everybody, right? Like, so just to be clear, we're going to make a new protocol with blackjack and etc. Then, like, in fact, forget the blackjack. Like, it's like your spin up time is like order months, right? Like at an absolute minimum, right? Like, so if you want to be able to do anything with this soon, if you want to make a protocol, you need to be prepared that it's going to cost you months of development time to get agreement and actually make a protocol. If you're not starting from something else already and tweaking it, that is months, right? Like that
okay.
is.
I don't think we're talking about the same thing here.
Okay.
So
So
what I believe
that was all I
Keith-
wanted to say from
Yeah,
my
yeah.
experience with Gateway API. Like,
Oh,
if you want to start a
100%.
new protocol, you're looking at at
Yeah.
least a year. That's all
100%.
it is.
But what I think Keith and I are talking about, it fundamentally gets down to the question Keith put in the chat of why are we trying to do this in Gateway API? What's the use case? AI Gateway Working Group started from an agentic use case and have taken a hard look at this and gone, maybe we don't need this. And okay, if we're talking about authorization, we have simpler options. If we're talking about agentic, we're exploring other things. If we're talking about other stuff, where's the use case that drives
Yeah,
us to want to standardize external processing at all in Gateway API?
That's a good question. It will have to be answered. I mean, I don't want to try to answer you on the spot, but like, I respect
Right.
your question, and I think it's going to be in this provisional gap, or if we decide it's not Gateway API.
Now, to be clear, I also want to say I never have a problem with somebody submitting a provisional GEP, ever. So you want to do a provisional GEP? Rock on, dude. It can be merged as provisional, and then the community can comment on it, and we can go forward with that, right? So if that's what you're asking, if it's okay,
No, I'm
if you
not
do a
asking
provisional GEP,
information.
yeah,
I'm
go
trying-
ahead. That
Like,
sounds
I'm
great.
trying to test the water and make something we have been discussing as a group, and like
Right.
including all the people for years, and trying to make it a reality, right? I'm not talking about, and this asking for use cases, as you and Kita pointed to, and we discussed in AI Gateway Working Group, makes sense to me, that we are actually questioning, do we even need to go outside?
Right.
100% on board with this. I respect that, and I think it's great. Whether or not we still have use cases left for external processing, it's a very good question to ask, and it would be asked in the gap. I respect it, but
Or maybe start a GitHub discussion and ask for use cases there, right? That would also be a great way to do this.
yeah.
And
Anyway, my point is, like, I think you kind of, it's a good outcome, but we kind of derail to talk about like the use cases for a minute. But like, I guess the group has started, as you point to, from external processing until we came to the realization that we may not need external processing. But we have started with this, and therefore there is this proposal that was open, and Shahar was just commenting on here on chat, which I very much agree, to this, like, starting with a new protocol, and let's be super aspirational. I'm just saying, and it has been mentioned in every AI Gateway Working Group, not just for me, we need to be realistic as well, right? Like, and like, I'm specifically like saying it out loud, right? People are pretty sensitive when someone say Envoy or XProc, like, and kind of vendor neutrality, everything. Like, it's not about let's take Envoy and do it. Like, I'm going to talk about it in public, and like all these comments are like, but let's be realistic. If we want to get Envoy people actually implementing a protocol that's not defined in their repo, it's going to be useful to start from something and iterate to fix, other than say, hey, whatever you're doing is, shit, forget me for my word. Let's just do a whole new thing. And all the people that are already using your product, or your not a product, your proxy, are just going to need to move to that. It's not a healthy start.
So Lior, that last comment is exactly what I'm worried about. Like there's a term that you see in economics called regulatory capture. And
Yup.
essentially, it's the idea that the people who have went out ahead in the space and have defined something then work with standards bodies to say this is the standard or to shape the standard in a way that's favorable to them. I mean, I'm not under any like delusions here. I understand that co-opetition and all this sort of stuff, like that's open source. I'm not trying to stop the development of a standard. What I am concerned about is this idea that, oh, it's now just being realistic or just being practical to cater to all of Envoy's use cases because otherwise they won't implement it. Like, yeah, let's have a conversation with Envoy maintainers. Like, if Envoy is going to refuse to implement something that's not going to work with XProc, then maybe Envoy just won't implement the standard and everybody else will. Like, I don't think that it's
Right.
I have concerns with regulatory capture aspect of this. If we're just going to say, oh, if Envoy won't implement it, then it can't happen in Gateway API. That is the wrong path for us to go down as a standards body, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we're too fast to jump to like, hey, I think what needs to be done. This was trying like we got into a lot of things. Like my point was someone needs to go start a PR with a protocol, right? This is my point. Someone needs to go start a PR. Again, this PR should have this use cases, right? Not the API, right? But like this provisional, like this protocol, and then can actually add the protocol and reason about, what is this protocol solving, and here's how it fits to the ecosystem. Every gateway API gap has to have a table where actually where are all this proxy today and what do they implement, right? Like we are actually looking at prior art. This is part of our process, right? So I'm just, when someone's going to do this PR, they're going to need to look at prior art, and doing something completely different from prior art wouldn't help standardization, right?
So overall, I would like to close this off with the comment that I just put in, where if we're coming to the Gateway API group to say, let's talk about use cases that would require external processing and then figure out what we want to do, I am 100% behind that. I am much less than 100% behind, let's talk about whether we should do something based on XProc, because that's kind of jumping ahead to the solution instead of wrapping our heads around what problem we're trying to solve first. And that, I think, is the real crux of what I at least have been trying to say.
This makes sense to me. One of the things I've said is that as a community, right, and as a people who are working in networking, there's going to be a handful of things that would be able to be you would be able to implement via some kind of extensibility. Could be external processing, could be WASM, could be anything else. And the direction of like trying to spill out all the use cases up front and discussing whether these use cases should or should not be solved in process is going to be orthogonal to any standardization efforts to standardize something that actually say, let's call out externally, like external auth, right? We're not standardizing all the things that external auth can do in process, right? So I respect this discussion about standardizing things without external processing and tackling one by one, but we have been talking about this for a lot of years about, hey, we have to have a mechanism to do some extensibility, whether it's, again, which is not defined for the use case. It's like very use case specific. And this is going to be the main use case you're going to see on this gap, right? On this PR, right? Which is we need a way to make something implemented in a different server or in a WASM or whatever that's not concretely defined before.
Those are two pretty... You don't need XDauth to have WASM executing on your data plane, for example.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I didn't say what.
Quite a bit over time here.
Yeah. Anyway, we can start with that. I'm just saying, like, if the discussion is going to evolve to, hey, why don't we do this use case in process? Like, then it's going to be discussion by this, like a use case by use case, and we will never standardize a way to do something like to just have the ecosystem of extension, which we have came to realize is important.
I need to drop at this point, but one thing I'll put I just put it in the chat. Are we sure we need to standardize? Like if there's WebAssembly, there's Lua, there's external processing, like, is this really a space that needs standardization? Like maybe if let's just say that's not true, but let's just say only Envoy can do external processing, or only Envoy can do this, or maybe only maybe we need to let the ecosystem and the industry diverge a bit before coming together and figuring out the best parts of that. I would like to see sort of, even if it's not just use cases, at least a motivation for why external processing or why WebAssembly, or like, what are the problems? Why do they need to be standardized in Gateway API before we try to design a protocol? I think that's honestly the first PR, the first discussion needs to happen versus the protocol. But now at this point, we really need to drop. Appreciate everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Keith.
Yeah, I think we are actually past 20 minutes, and I gotta drop as well. Nick, probably you can just go to the beach and see the sunrise. It's fine for you.
It is nearly 2:30 in the morning. Yeah, I would like to finish up. So
yeah.
Thank you all. I will talk to you in this sort of
Thanks,
meeting
everyone.
in June, probably, or asynchronously in some of y'all's case. So if you do need something from me before I leave, please ping it to me in the next day or two. Otherwise, I won't have time to get back to you. Cool.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much, folks.
Okay.
Thank
See you,
you.
folks.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.